Welcome to a brand new podcast. Iain Maclean is a writer and the author of TJ's War. David Blair is an actor and the narrator of the audiobook TJ's War. David and Iain have been listening to their readers and listeners and have decided to turn TJ's War into a movie. And since the story covers the entirety of World War II, the movie will cost at least $50 million. Will David and Iain succeed in their quest? Follow them in this podcast series. We're going to make a $50 million movie.
Hello. Welcome to an episode of We're Going to Make a $50 Million Movie. And this episode is just me. My name's Iain Maclean. I wrote the book, TJ's War. One version of it's up there. And I thought I'd tell you a little bit about me and maybe a bit about some of the driving forces behind writing the book. If you've actually watched any of the episodes up until now, you'll probably know that TJ was my father and he died when I was 10. But I found a photograph when I was 15 and that put me on a search which lasted the next 30 years. Unfortunately, 30 years finished about 20 odd years ago. I'm not nearly as young as I'd like to be. When I first started to investigate my father's life, I realized he was in the army. I realized he'd been in the military and he'd been in the Second World War. I was 15 when I found that out. And I hadn't really thought about the military up until then. But it kind of had an influence on me. And when I was 17 and still at school, just finishing school, the RAF on their milk run came to our school. And I was going to go to university to study electrical and electronic engineering. And the RAF said, well, we could pay you through to do that on a university cadetship. And then you're become an RAF officer for the next 8 years, and then you can go off and do what you want. So I thought that's quite interesting, to get paid to go to university. And so I applied, and I was taken down from the north of Scotland to Biggin Hill, RAF Biggin Hill at the time, which is in Bromley in Kent. While there, they said to me, because they by this point done medical checks and what they call aptitude tests, they asked me why I had not applied to be a pilot, and I basically had never thought about it, never dreamed of that I could fly an aircraft. And they said, well, it's just that your test so far suggests you could be a pilot, and we're much more interested in that than anything else. Now, as a 17-year-old boy, what I was really interested in was girls. And I thought, well, maybe I'll get a really attractive girlfriend by being a pilot. So I thought, well, put me down for that. And they did. And lo and behold, a couple of months later, I was offered a university cadetship to be a pilot in the RAF. And so I went through training from that direction. And I went through officer training at RAF Cranwell and just worked my way through the flying training while at university and so on. And I met some wonderful people. Some of the finest people I've ever met were in the RAF, and I'm sure there are equally fine people in there today. It's a very interesting organization. It's full of people with real energy and discipline and integrity and respect for each other. But at the same time, I was still researching what my father had got up to, and I realized by the time I was 19, 20 years old that actually he didn't want to kill anyone. And it was something that he tried to avoid throughout the entire war. And you'll read in the book, there were strategies that allowed him to believe he'd never killed anyone when he probably had. I say this about my father, but this was extremely common. A psychological study of American soldiers coming back from Japan just after the war determined that most of them thought they hadn't killed anybody. But the reality of so many dead Japanese and others in the Pacific Basin would tell a different story. So I decided that I was probably in the wrong job if I didn't want to kill anyone. And so I resigned my commission, and as a young, early to mid-20s, was rather confused about what to do next. I hadn't given it much thought. So I put a rucksack on my back and I set off through Europe, Africa and America. I actually hitchhiked across the Sahara Desert over a period of 3 months from the north in Algiers down to Tamanrasset still in Algeria, but in the south side of the Sahara Desert. And then I had to come all the way back to Algiers because the borders were shut due to a cholera outbreak in the neighbouring countries. Then I came back to Paris, and I worked in Paris for 6 months as a waiter. I loved that. It was great fun. Very different from being an officer in the RAF, where your Batman comes in first thing in the morning with your polished shoes and a cup of tea and a biscuit before you go off to do whatever you're training to do that day. But within 6 months, I was the chap with the cup of tea and the biscuit serving somebody else. And then I went to America, and I arrived into New York, actually into Newark. And I went into New York itself and picked up a Greyhound bus and travelled for 3.5 days on the Greyhound bus across to Los Angeles. I'm sure you can still do that, and I strongly recommend it to anybody from the UK who's able to do it, because you meet the entire cross-section of America while you're on that bus. I think it was the same bus all the way through. Drivers got on and off along the way. And people got on and off along the way, and I talked with a lot of them. Very interesting. And America was, and I think still is, an amazing country. Wonderful people. There's a few fruitcakes with guns out there, but most of the people in America are really wonderful. And the country itself is amazing to look at as a tourist. And I arrived in California, arrived into Los Angeles, and had already secured a job as a waiter in a top restaurant in Palos Verdes, which is one of the richest parts of America. And I earned more as a waiter working in Palos Verdes for 6 months. But then I decided, this is really not the life for me. I had very different ideas about who I was going to be, and I had gone way off track. So I came back to the UK and got on with my career, so I thought. I went into retail. I joined Dixon's Stores Group, who own Currys and Dixon's and quite a few other things, I think. And I became a regional manager for the north of Scotland with them, looking after a number of branches of Currys. And I really enjoyed that. I found that I could sell, and I did that. And then a chap came into the Inverness branch of Currys and said, do you think Currys would like to buy me out? He just happened to be our biggest competition in the north of Scotland. And this came to my attention, and I went to see him, and I said, Currys wouldn't like to buy you out, but I might, because I just got married by this point, and I thought I needed to earn more money and have a clear idea of what I was going to do for the rest of my working time. So I took the company books he had for the previous 5 years to an accountant friend of mine, and he came back to me and he said, well, these books are all lodged with Companies House in Edinburgh. They all seem fine. He's not making much money. He's making about $1.5 million a year, and he's clearing about 1% profit on that, net profit. But I knew he could make a lot more than that, and I knew that his style of doing business was very old, and with what I'd learned from Dixon Stores Group and elsewhere, I knew I could make a difference. So I raised the money and bought him out, and I learned 3 very good lessons from doing that. First lesson is, never buy somebody else's business. They're never selling it to you for the reason they are giving. Second lesson, never use bank money. They control you by the nose as soon as you start to borrow money from them, and your secrets of your company are not secrets when they're with the bank. They have got lots of people, lots of companies in different parts of the country who can benefit from knowing things about your company. And the third lesson is never trust an expert. I had accountants, I had solicitors, I had bank managers, I had various other consultants, all telling me things that were supposed to help me be successful in that business. And they were all wrong. At the very best, don't just take one person's word for it. At least get a second opinion about almost anything you've been advised on. So I ended up having to close that business down. We were very nearly succeeded. We lasted 3 years. But I had to close that business down. It broke my heart. We lost all the money we had. And I didn't really know what I was going to do with myself. I had 2 children and a third on the way. And I was in my early 30s. So I decided to go back to university and get a degree in computer science. This was in the early 90s. And because of my previous time at university, I was able to go straight into second year of that degree at Strathclyde University. And I loved it. I felt I could program better than I could speak English, and a lot of people would say that's still true. I came out of that time with a very good degree in computer science, and I specialized in artificial intelligence. And as part of my thesis in my final year, I solved a problem that had been thought to be impossible to solve up until then. So this came to the attention of a company based in London called PA Consulting Group. And I was recruited into PA Consulting Group upon graduation as a management consultant. And I'd never heard of management consultants before that. I had no idea what they did. But I joined PA, and I was lucky because PA Consulting Group are actually a very good consulting group. The phrase that we used often was that we were the SAS to Accenture's Red Army. And very often we'd go into companies after one of the big five had been in there to sort out the mess they'd created. And we did fix it. I was with PA for nearly 10 years and did some wonderful things. Went right around the world, worked in wonderful, really difficult problems with brilliant people in large companies, some of the largest companies in the world. And I've still got a lot of friends and colleagues from that time. But then I thought, well, I'm doing okay as a management consultant, but I'm making a lot of money for the partners of this company, and I'm not making that much money for myself. So I decided to go off on my own in 2002, 2003, and I became an independent management consultant, and that's what I've done for the last 20, 21, 22 years. All the time, up until about 2002, I was going out about once a year to wherever I knew my father had worked, or there were people who had worked with him, and researching his story and continuing to research it because it got bigger and bigger and bigger. And by 2002, there was really nobody left. They'd all died of old age or of some other form. And so I pretty much put the story to bed. I did try and write the story down for my children. I wrote about 100 pages and gave it to my eldest daughter at the time. But she wasn't really interested, and none of them were. I couldn't really get that connection. I felt it was a shame, but I'd lived through the time when there were a lot of people who'd survived the Second World War who were in their 40s, 50s, and 60s, and they didn't. They didn't really get what these people had gone through. In 2020, I had just taken up the role with what's called ORAT, Operational Readiness for an Airport. And this was in Jeddah in Saudi Arabia, a massive new terminal, just about to go online. And I was part of a team that went in there to sort that out. I worked in the maintenance utilities area, getting all the various processes. So they have 36,000 people working in maintenance and utilities at the airport. Very different from the UK, very different from Heathrow or Gatwick. And it was a wonderful time. I think Saudi Arabia has been given a lot of very bad press. And while, yes, there have been some things that have happened which shouldn't have happened, that's true of any country. But the Crown Prince is trying to open that country up. He's got rid of the Sharia police. Women have got as many rights as men. I promise you they do. Able to drive, able to work, able to do whatever they wanted. Able to dress how they wanted. And I find the people in Saudi Arabia to be some of the nicest, friendliest, finest people I've ever come across. Really good people. But it was the pandemic. It was the time of the pandemic. So there was a massive lockdown for the best part of 15 months. And so for 15 months, I wasn't able to travel in or out of the country. I was there and I was able to work. But apart from working, I was in my apartment. And so I thought I'd use that time to write the story of TJ. And I had decided by that point that the story needed to engage people. People were tired of reading, well, the audience I wanted to get to wouldn't read a book of facts about the Second World War. So I decided to write this as a novel, which was much easier than it seems because my father died when I was 10. He'd become this kind of icon of a figure rather than my real father. And I think in writing the story as a novel, it helped me get to know him that bit better. I was almost thinking aloud while writing down his story. And it is a story of, it's a war story, but it is really an anti-war story. And it is very much a love story while being a true story. And the people who've read it so far, they seem to get it, and that makes me very happy. So what else can I tell you about myself? Well, my favourite writer was Ernest Hemingway. I loved the way he's told a story. My favourite film is Joe versus the Volcano, and people think I'm mad for enjoying that, but if you get down to the guts of that story, it's about a man who has lost his way and then is given an opportunity to end his life in a way that suits his version of life. It's a comedy and a love story. But really, it's about a man who has lost his soul, regaining it. Written by John Patrick Shanley, who's an Irish American. And I think the man's a genius. He came up with something very unique in that film. In that he wrote the story and then directed the film. And it's not long. It's joyous and fascinating. There's so many levels to it, and there's just tons and tons of symbolism. Let me just give you one. Keep looking for ducks. You will find ducks throughout the film. Ducks is a representation of the soul in some cultures. Don't know why. I'm fascinated by large stones, and I've got a number of places on my bucket list, and I've gone through quite a few of them so far. I've taken my children, as each one of them got to be around about 17, 18 years old, to various places. So I took one of my daughters to Egypt, and we went to the pyramids at Giza and then down the Nile and looked at these various temples. I took my eldest son to Peru, and we went around Cusco and Sacsayhuaman and Ollantaytambo and Machu Picchu, of course. And I took my oldest daughter to Cambodia, to Angkor Wat. Angkor Wat is a single temple. There are actually 1,800 temples around that area. Some of them are absolutely massive. There's a statue of an elephant, full-sized, from a single block of stone. And somehow they've managed to get this statue about 40 or 50 feet above the ground, well over 1,000 years ago, possibly more. And what they've achieved there is just fantastic. The things that really fascinate me about these large structures is the technology that they weren't supposed to have, and we don't know how they've done it. But some of these blocks of stone, in Sacsayhuaman, for example, in Peru, over 100 tons. That was 13,000 foot up a mountain, and the stone didn't come from that mountain. Now, I was there. I even had a measuring tape, so it was well over 100 tons. And it's supposed to be the Incas, but there's no real evidence to say that the Incas had the technology to do this. Not only are they massive, but they're cut so that you couldn't get a knife between them. I find all of that absolutely fascinating. And again, a bit like the photograph I found of my father, these structures are a message to us saying there's something out there that we don't understand and we should be researching it. And even though some people are, the vast majority of academia dismiss it all as thousands of slaves. I worked on a project for the Port of Felixstowe back in 2002, which had the largest key cranes, the largest cranes in the UK, and they are some of the largest cranes in the world, that can move in 3 dimensions of their own accord. And they take the containers on and off ships, large container ships. Heaviest weight they can lift is 70 tons. And they don't. They hardly ever go above 50 tons. Now, one of the blocks of stone at Stonehenge is 50 tons. It's just breathtaking how they were able to do all of this stuff. And I find that I don't have any expectation of solving that mystery, but I do find it fascinating. And if you know how it was done, please let me know. I think that's as much as I want to tell you. There's an awful lot more I could tell you, but I'm not going to. So, I hope you find this interesting, and I hope you're enjoying our episodes. The great thing about a podcast and its episodes, it has no shelf life. People can come back and look at these episodes just whenever. And I hope you do. I hope there are people looking at the episodes that we've done and the episodes that we're about to do, and even this one, 100 years from now. Because it's all still relevant. I'm pretty sure we'll still be making the same stupid mistakes that we're making right now. Even though with people like me trying to stop it. Thank you for watching. As I have the opportunity, I want to say thank you to all of the team, Quinn and Sia and Mark, and well, Sia's in Texas and Mark's in Japan, and David, of course, who read the book. He's based in the UK along with Quinn. Sincera out in Los Angeles, and a new member of the team called Matt. I'll tell you more about him, or he'll tell you more about him in due course. Thank you very much to all of them. None of this would be possible without their fantastic support. Except they're not here today. Have a great week. See you again this time next week, and be safe out there.
To find out more about the book, visit tjswar.com, and to buy it, click on the Amazon link below. To accompany us on our journey, please subscribe to this podcast, because we're going to make a $50 million movie.